Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Future of BizTech. I'm your host, JC Granger, and I have another fantastic guest on the show with us today. And listen, if you end up loving this episode, please show your love and appreciation by following this podcast wherever you're listening and, give it a 5-star review, put some nice comments in there, because that is how other techies like you and I find cool podcasts like this. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing James Malley, the founder and CEO of Paccurate. James, thank you so much for being on the show. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what it is that Paccurate does.
Sure. Hi. Hello. Thank you for having me. Like you said, I'm the co-founder over at Paccurate. We are a cartonization software provider, which is kind of a mouthful, but it basically just means that the packages that show up on your doorstep, we help retailers and other shippers make sure those boxes are as efficiently packed as possible so they can save money and reduce their carbon footprint.
That's actually not a small thing, right? I mean, like, here's the thing. I'm one of those habitual, like every 2 days is Christmas for me because my Amazon packages come. Now, obviously Amazon does their own, but I also, some of the best things I ever buy are from Instagram ads, right? Shopify stores, essentially, right?
Right.
So do you work with more Shopify companies or is it individual wholesale retailers? Like, who's your perfect client that uses Paccurate?
It's kind of all across the board, honestly, and in terms of size as well. So we have some customers that ship, 4,000 or 5,000 packages, a month, and others that do that every half hour. So it's kind of all over the place.
Now, okay, so then you guys are outsourced. Are you outsourced? I mean, like, for example, if someone is selling on Amazon and they're not using FBA, right, fulfillment by Amazon, they're selling it, but the packages could be packaged from you guys still. Is that an option they have?
Yeah, so we're pure software, so we don't actually do any of the packing.
I'm sorry, I meant can they use your software
Oh,
to
yes,
initiate that? My apologies. Yeah,
absolutely.
I phrased that incorrectly.
Well, I only mentioned it because we do get that question sometimes, but pretty much wherever this shipment originates is where our software runs, and it looks at what's being shipped out. It looks at the cost implications of picking this box, these boxes, etc. And then it shows packing instructions with a 3D visual on a screen, typically at that pack station, so the operator can put it together.
That's awesome. Well, what motivated you to start the company? I mean, did you work in an industry and you're like, this is crap, this could be done better? Or was it just an idea you had over beers with a friend? Like, just what's that origin story?
It's kind of like all of the above. My co-founder, who's our CTO now and kind of the architect of our core tech, we have been freelancing in the space for a while. So we would help shippers get their shipping systems set up and like integrated to their other systems. And it was around the time that FedEx and UPS started penalizing poor packing more. So this was like 2017, 2018, where we had some of these clients that we had would say, well, I'm getting absolutely hammered with these fees. The features in my warehouse management system, et cetera, that are supposed to handle this are just like not working. What do we do? And Pat and I kind of at that point, we had been doing the freelancing thing for long enough that we were like, we want to make something we own. We're kind of tired of running around putting out other people's fires all the time. And so we gave it a shot, and yeah, that's kind of the origin story. We didn't get like hit in the head by an apple or anything. It was more just listening to what our existing kind of customer or client base was telling us.
Well, I mean, that is one of the more common ways, of course, right? I mean, a lot of people try to push something onto an audience or an industry, and they find that it just falls flat, and they invest all this time and money. And the smart ones, like you were saying, you listen first and see what people are asking for, because they'll tell you. Right. And you say, oh, okay, cool. I'll just go build that thing. And then like, great, thanks.
Right. We had, sorry, but we had had, kind of a few startup ideas in a prior part of our life. And, they ended up being like really kind of aspirational and like nobody asked for it, but we wanted to build something cool. This was very much the excitement kind of all came after, once we actually started to get data, started to get big users and see what the actual impact was of the thing we had made out of curiosity. So it was kind of instead of, like you said, instead of the eureka moment, that kind of came later.
So I would imagine that someone listening to this podcast might be someone who's thinking about getting into, you know, e-commerce and selling things online and stuff. You brought up something that I never thought about and that I haven't heard of before, which was that these major shipment carriers are penalizing for poor packaging. Can you clarify a little more about like what does poor packaging look like and how much does that cost companies, right? Like, I mean, you're helping solve a problem that some companies came across. I'm curious from the point of view of someone who's about to get into it so they don't have that problem to begin with.
Sure. Sure. So when you're just starting out as an e-commerce seller, if you're doing your own fulfillment, most times starting out, you use a 3PL while you get things off the ground. But if you're doing your own fulfillment,
3PL for the audience who doesn't know 3PL.
A third-party logistics company like Stored is a good example. There's hundreds of these companies that you send them all your product and they'll pack it up and ship it based on the orders that you get. So pretty like low startup costs because you're tapping into an existing network, and they're a great option. But whether you want to try fulfilling yourself out of your garage or maybe you're coming out with like a big, huge overnight success product and you start opening warehouses, you might initially have the time on each shipment to like be thoughtful about how you put it all together. But hopefully you very soon hit a volume of orders where there's no time to really do these things carefully. And I think one of the things we've found is it's not really fair to put packing mistakes on the actual packing, the people doing the packing, because 99% of the time, their prime directive is to get all the orders out the door. That's really the most important thing. These things have to get on a truck, especially because e-commerce customers expect speed now. Thanks, Amazon. So having something in place that can provide a little instruction there takes the burden away from the people in the warehouse who would otherwise be responsible. Especially for a problem like this, which is so foundational to your kind of supply chain, it could be really important.
So would somebody using your software be able to use and work with Stored? Because you are saying that it provides instructions. So if someone was sending all their product to another company, a 3PL, and they said, but hey, and then you run your software to say, this is how to do it right so that we don't have issues? Or do you find that there's barriers or walls in between that overlap?
We do partner with 3PLs, and there's a couple different ways 3PLs work. Often the e-commerce brand will pay for the shipping, and so there's definitely more incentive for the brand to tell the 3PL like, look, I'm looking for any and all ways to lower my fulfillment costs here. You need to pack these things better. Or in kind of the old school parlance, they might give them like a scorecard to say, your average error per box is like 80%. You're going to need to get that down, or we're looking for a new 3PL. So it really depends on kind of the relationship and the deal you have with the 3PL, but we can get plugged in pretty much anywhere.
Do you have general average stats of kind of like that one liner, the elevator pitch of Paccurate saves on average X amount of cents or dollars per package sent with its efficiency and instruction?
Sure. 15% is the average saved on shipping costs, which is pretty good. And I don't think we've ever saved any less than 6%, which is still, for a lot of our customers, that's many millions of dollars, because transportation is incredibly expensive for retailers. So that's kind of the headline number, but I think what we get more excited about is the material savings, like other things that have more to do with scope 3 emissions reduction. I think our average cardboard saved is around a square foot per carton, just by on average choosing smaller cartons. And that can equal hundreds of acres of cardboard. Acres is sort of our favorite measuring stick for material savings across in the course of a month. So those are the fun numbers anyway.
So let's talk about that then. So it sounds like you guys have an altruistic nature, obviously, as well to your business. How much of that is a driver of the business, and is there any other than this being something that makes you happy? Is there anything that's passed on to, maybe not necessarily money wise, right? Because we already figured out the savings on the economic side, but I guess how important of the business is the environmental side? And is there any other benefits to focusing on that as a business?
Yeah, I mean, I would say our team is incredibly idealistic, and a lot of our kind of momentum and energy is basically from those numbers, looking at like, pounds of CO2 saved and all these things.
Yeah.
In terms of passed on, I mean, the emissions we reduce, would you say your audience is familiar with scope 3 emissions versus scope 1 and 2?
I probably, well, how about this? If any audience is gonna know about it, it would be mine, because we're all tech nerds, right? That
Okay,
listen to this. But maybe break it down a little simpler for the newer followers.
Sure. Yeah. So there are different kinds of emissions that companies are responsible for. And scope 1 and 2 can happen inside your four walls. So if you're, I don't know, melting plastic in your office or something, that's probably a scope 1 or 2, as one does. Scope 3 emissions are things that you do that cause outside of your four walls there to be some sort of carbon impact. So it's pretty
impact,
yeah, exactly. So in shipping, it's pretty straightforward. I caused FedEx to use 100 trucks over this past year. That is still my scope 3 emission. And that sounds, like something, we're doing the best we can. We really are relying on our partner, FedEx in this case, to minimize those emissions. Legislation has come down in Europe that is coming here, and there are actually a lot of momentum behind it to hold companies accountable for scope 3 emissions. So this is, something that we've noticed even in just the past few months. A lot of retailers looking for supply chain ESG initiatives, because supply chain is a huge source of scope 3 emissions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I look at, because like when I'm buying an airplane ticket, right, I now see that there's a line item for how much emissions. Now, I like transparency, just generally speaking, right, regardless of the industry. I think the problem is that I think most people they look at that number and that doesn't mean anything to them. They don't know. Maybe they're happy to say, oh, okay, like cool, but like there's no real like yet anyway. We're not taught at an educational level, typically by standard or even societally, what is too much, if it's this line item for carbon emission versus the other one, like, okay, I know a higher one is worse, right? But if you just show me one, I don't know if that's good or bad. But I feel like with what you're saying, if the legislation is coming this way, whether people agree with it or not, it's still going to create attention to it. And I look at it as a parallel to when nutrition facts came onto food, right? Yeah, people forget. Like, I mean, I grew up with nutrition facts on food. I'm 40 years old, but my parents probably didn't, right? There was a time when it was just, here's your food, and people had no idea. And even then, when those nutrition facts came out, there was probably a certain amount of time before they didn't know what that meant. Like, is that good? Is that bad? And over time, you start to get an idea. How long do you think it'll be before an average person can look at a line item that is presented to them on something they purchase where it shows carbon footprint, where they might actually understand how much of an effect that has, or how much it's saved, or much better or worse?
I think that consumers that are already kind of sustainability minded, probably within the next 2 years, will have a mechanism. It might be, regulated like nutrition facts, where, not too long ago, we're like 2% zinc, or not understanding what that meant. I think in general, the average person, probably within the next 5 to 7 years, will be able to tell anytime they order something, what the impact of that is going to be.
Does your software pass the positive impact stat to the seller so that they can pass it on a receipt of some sort to the buyer?
Yes. And really, what we do is twofold. So we do this real-time instruction. So you could think of this as like operational efficiency. The other side is analysis and simulation. So it allows our customers to, select a big chunk of their shipping history and then run simulations and say, okay, what would it do to my corrugate cardboard usage if my flagship product was a quarter of an inch smaller, or if I switch to this 3PL or this carrier, how would my packing and emissions change? So there's like a planning element, but there's like, here's what is actually happening today. And all those stats we make very visible and will kind of actively point out, because if you care about sustainability, but you have bosses who are more about the bottom line, that's what makes packing just like the great place to start, because you are paying to pollute. Like every cost associated with parcel fulfillment is also almost one-to-one associated with emissions. So you can keep it quiet that your motivation is being greener, and just highlight the dollar savings to your bosses or whoever it may be, or vice versa. We have a few larger customers where we came in as part of an ESG initiative, and the dollar savings was kind of incidental. So yeah, that's kind of why we nerd out about this specific problem.
I think you bring up a good point about where people's motivation lies, right? Like, I think that a lot of companies are trying to go green as a money saving thing. See, at first going green was more expensive. So I have this opinion that like oil companies will have no problem going green when the numbers benefit their bottom line, right? And any other, take any other type of industry, chemical plants, whatever. I think once the technology makes the numbers go in their favor, they're following the numbers, because not the altruistic part or the forward thinking. And again, we can all have our opinions on that. What I'm saying is that what's interesting and what's nice to hear is that technology is advancing in that direction. There will be a tipping point soon, and it has hit in certain industries where it actually is more beneficial to go in the quote green route financially. But that's just what, especially in America, right? That is a large motivator for how our infrastructure is set up. We are there are other countries that maybe look, that's why we didn't start the legislation. It starts in Europe, right? And then they're going to test it out there, and then somebody will probably bring it here. But here's what I think is interesting. Your company, your software specifically, I think will absolutely blow up here in a good way very soon, if what you're saying about the legislation is true and it comes here. Because what I've seen as a pattern in our government, regardless of the party, is that tax incentives come with certain legislations. And if this one in particular you're talking about from Europe comes over here, there will probably be some sort of corporate tax incentive to adopt greener ideas. And your software is something that's already available to procure that, right? So I think that's good for him. It's a great position for your company. It also has the benefit of being good for the planet, obviously. And we're not perfect. A lot of people talk about like electric cars, and they're like, well, look, you still have to mine for the batteries. Like, yeah, but that's not great, but it's still better than our current one. Like no one's saying it's great. No one said absolutely there's no harm to the planet by creating going and mining the nickel or whatever, the lithium ion, whatnot. No one disagrees that the process sucks.
Right.
But if you just put them side by side, one has a higher chart, number than the other. And it's just, if we keep going that direction, then eventually maybe we get to something that can be a zeroed out, right? And that's the goal, right? A net zero for that. Right. Cool. Okay. So let me ask you, how are you getting the word out? Like, how old is your company first? And then what are you doing? I'm a marketing guy. As you know, you listen to my podcast, I always have to ask this question. So beyond, first, how old are you? And then also, what are you guys doing to tell companies that you exist?
Sure. So we're about 5 years old. My co-founder and I were noodling on it for a couple of years before that. The pandemic is when we started to get big brands using our technology. And we kind of leveraged the success there to raise a seed round almost exactly a year ago. And that allowed us to grow the team and, get some more marketing funding together. So we have kind of a multi-prong approach. We do some digital marketing, and I would say it's okay. It brings in folks like when they're specifically looking for what we have.
More inbound stuff.
Yeah, and it it's a fairly niche, right sizing boxes is not a massively booming industry yet. So people are usually looking for something like what we have. I would say the most successful marketing initiatives are also always things we do with our partners. So shipping software companies, packaging distributors and corrugate manufacturers send us a ton of leads because they care about their customers being efficient. This has been more of a recent discovery and kind of interesting revelation, but we reduce the amount of material that shippers use. That has not stopped materials vendors from sending their customers to us. You'd think there would be kind of a some friction there, but it's actually, some of these companies are serious about sustainability. A lot of the pessimism that I used to hold in my heart has kind of been vanquished over the past 6 months or so, which is I'm happy to report.
That is good. That's awesome. All right. Well, let's talk about, you say the last 6 months. So let's talk about the future a little bit here, right? Future of biz tech. So we always ask this question. First off, it's a two-part question. The first part is this: where do you see the industry you're in? So we'll call it, let's say, supply chain or packing software. And I don't know how many competitors you have, but let's just say your general industry. Where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years, whether it be through technology or legislation, like we talked about, or culture or anything like that? What's the big picture that you see happening?
Yeah, definitely more. I mean, we talked about it a lot, but definitely more emphasis on ESG. And I think, you mentioned, trade-offs, and I think that's probably what the bulk of green solutions will have attached to them. But packing, it's one of those things where there's not many trade-offs because it's part of the maybe least sexy R of the 3 R's, the reduce. And I think the more technology comes out that doesn't have trade-offs, that is just, we just found a way to use less of this thing. That's really what's exciting to me. Reusable things, I guess that's another R, but using less material, using less space. We talk a lot about bandwidth and taking up less space in the supply chain network. I think that's going to be a major focus.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. And where do you see your company? I mean, you got a seed round a year ago. You obviously clearly been using the money well, which is good. Where do you see your company in the next 6 months to a year? Like, you got any cool roadmap stuff that you can give us a little preview on? Like, what's coming here?
Some of the kind of alliances that we're working on at the moment, I'm really excited about, because we used to be just with the API is what we started with, were the real-time packing instructions. And so a lot of our partnerships were pure, operational software. Now that we've got this, simulation capability, we're suddenly got like a toe in the packaging space. So I'm really excited about making our platform kind of a little bit more involved in the way that packaging is procured. In terms of like what's imminent, actually this morning, Cubiscan, which is one of the most successful companies that makes dimensioning equipment that actually can capture dimensions and understand what objects look like. They just sent out a press release about our partnership with them. So you heard it here first.
Nice.
That was the big thing that happened this week.
That's exciting. That's awesome. Okay. I always like to ask a personal question. So I'm going to ask, you told me in the pre-show that you're a new father, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm a father as well, and it's been a while since I've been a new father, but when I think about my daughter and my business, right, as far as a long term, like, what am I doing? Is it something I want to hand down to her? Is it something that I want to sell and then move on to something new? So I guess my question for you as a new dad, have you thought long term, is this a company that you, or an industry that you want to stay in and maybe have something to pass down, or is it something that you want to eventually exit and then take those resources? And is there a next thing? Like, is there a bigger picture that we don't know about? I'm just curious.
Well, it's only this is our second kid and she's only 6 days old. So
Oh wow. I didn't know it was only six.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I had her on my chest sleeping during my last call today. But kind of when I'm looking at her, I'm not really envisioning pushing her towards supply chain in particular.
Yeah.
But I do, I do feel incredibly fortunate to be working on a problem that it's not going to solve climate change, but it might have a measurable impact on something related to emissions of supply chain, which is actually, pretty impactful. So I do think that, the joy that I get from that, I'm hoping that she finds something that she loves that is also satisfying in that way. And that helps me kind of with the fear of what, climate will be like when she is at the point where she can start making those decisions.
I think that's a good word too, fear, because I think if for any non-parents I've ever talked to, they was like, what's it like? I'm like, it's fear all the time. Like you still do it. Like you're not crumbled in a ball in the corner, in a cold shower, like anxiety and depression, but it really is, it's fear and hope at the same time, which is interesting. It's like this complete dichotomy of like right down the middle, like this extreme hope and happiness. On the other side is this extreme fear and like paranoia, like, because you can't afford for anything to go wrong, and so I think it's an interesting place to come from. But I think what you're doing is really great as far as when it comes to legacy. I think that's really cool, and not just legacy of reputation or name, but specifically in, like you said, you're not going to solve the whole problem, but the whole problem is so complex that it takes a million small solutions to even go in the right direction, and I would imagine that feels really good being a part of that. And I enjoy interviewing you for it. Given the industry you're in, there's been a lot of material that has been written and created. If there was one movie or book or podcast, something educational that ties into whether it be climate change or, is there anything that inspired you more that you could pass on to the audience for any kind of intellectual purposes?
Oh man. No, this is
spot,
an
huh?
on the spot question.
Huh?
Oh man.
And if you don't have a book or something, if there's a person too, I'm just curious, like, where would someone find a little more inspiration other than just Googling, stuff?
Well, I think I used to be fairly pessimistic in general, just kind of cynical, politically, about the world, all these things. And over the course of, starting this business and growing it and talking to companies, even big companies that when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I was like, corporate, whatever, I've just been so inspired by the earnestness that some of these folks have for being less wasteful, that there's not there's rarely a huge marketing campaign associated with these things. Like they actually care. And I hope that doesn't insult.
Like it's not all. You're not seeing like they're not adopting it for a PR stunt, is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I mean, although there might be some PR, you're not seeing what you would expect, that they're just doing it for the good look.
Right. Yeah. And I think that. So I guess my advice would be to just keep talking to people if you're feeling like there might not be a market for your sustainability solution. You might be surprised if you're able to keep talking to people. And the other thing, and the name escapes me, but I did read a book a while back about optimism. Maybe we can put it in the show notes if I can remember later. But optimism is far more useful, particularly for entrepreneurs, than is pessimism. And so one of our kind of company values is micro pessimism, macro optimism. And I think we stole that from Stripe or some other corporate, some other startup page, but we talk about it a lot because, when we're solving a problem, we're like, how, this won't work because of this won't, but the grander kind of vision of what we're trying to do, it has to be optimistic. You have to have a belief that what you're doing can be achieved.
Sure.
That would be my parting thought with no specific book attached to it.
I like that. I'm going to put you in contact she's a client of mine, actually, and I like her a lot. Her name's Lisa Foster. She is the author of a book called The Bag Lady. And you never heard like the term like, the crazy bag lady or whatever, and so she turned that into a book. And what it was is she was one of the first ones to actually convince corporations to get away from plastic bags. Like she was one of the starting people, like, and these companies started doing it, and then it became this big thing. And obviously, whether some people listening agree with it or not, it doesn't matter. She had a big impact. I'm going to put you in touch with her, I think, because she does coaching and consulting for big companies when it comes to a more green initiative. And I feel like if she knows about your software, that could be something maybe she even talks about with when she comes across the right client.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I'll put you guys in touch. She's really cool. You'll like her a lot. How can people who are listening, if they want to reach out and either use your software or any other kind of bigger deals, how can they get a hold of you in particular, and then also how do they get a hold of the company in general?
Me in particular, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so just look for me on there, James Malley. Talk mostly about putting things in boxes, so as long as you're willing to have that in your feed, we should connect. And Paccurate.io is our website. If you're technical, you can sign up and start using it really quickly. We haven't talked to maybe a quarter of our customers because they just came on board and started using it. And there's some cool ROI calculators and stuff there as well.
One question I did forget to ask, I want to make sure I squeeze in before we go. Who is this software for and who is it not for? As in, let's say size of company or where they're at, or if they're starting up versus they've got 10,000 packages a month. Is there any range where it's probably not a good fit and you specialize in a certain size or type of company?
Yeah, I would say our sweet spot is between 100,000 and 1 million shipments per month. So
enterprise level, big stuff.
That's pretty large, but we priced it in such a way that if you're only doing 5 to 10,000 a month, you will get even a higher percentage ROI than some of those larger customers. You can absolutely use it. I mean, the API, all the documentation's there. It's pretty much good to go. If you're small, like if you're an Etsy store, probably not a good fit. If you're packing things yourself, and just if that's the case, just be mindful about the materials you're using and try to pack each shipment with care.
Awesome. Well, listen, I appreciate it. And for everyone listening out there, again, if you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe to this podcast, give it that 5-star rating with a little bit of kind words behind it, so other techies like us can find it and enjoy learning about all these other amazing and helpful B2B softwares on the market today, just like Paccurate. James, thank you so much for being on the show. And like I said, after we get off here, I'll give you a shout and intro to Lisa.
Awesome. Thanks, JC.
Thanks a lot.